This is now. Well, joining us is Rolake Akinkugbe, who's head of energy research at EcoBank. Morning, Rolake.
Morning,
Lovely
Rolake.
to see you.
Nice to see you.
Let's start with the spy scandal, as the China Daily calls it. And I'm not terribly convinced that this is really a surprise to most of us. We know spying goes on, don't we? But what have we learned, would you say, from these days and days of revelations that have been coming out, like Angela Merkel's phone being tapped?
I mean, I think the biggest thing to have come out recently, and we knew there was going to be more after Edward Snowden, right? We knew there would be more revelations at various points. But I think what is particularly significant about this is that a country like Germany, for instance, is considered a friendly ally of the US. And this has surprised a lot of people. So the question is, well, if this can happen to a friendly ally, how much more can be revealed? And what is interesting now is that the Chinese, obviously, who up till now have remained slightly on the sidelines, have now come out and perhaps looking for some diplomatic points out of this.
Well, I mean, let's mention that China Daily is a state-sponsored newspaper, and they're saying this will weaken US global credibility. Is that really the case or not?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that would be probably the stance they would take anyway. But what is more interesting here is that the fact that China and Russia are now trying to table this proposal, sort of put this into some framework, perhaps at UN level, that would mean that countries would sign up to a framework to encourage mutual trust as a bit of an affront to the United States.
We shall see how that goes.
We should see how that goes, yeah.
OK, now, the Daily Mirror, obviously one of our very popular daily tabloid papers, it doesn't mince its words today, does it? And obviously this is the issue of the day here in Britain, isn't it? And in many ways, these are the new bankers, aren't they? The bosses of the energy firms.
They are, and they're getting it really tough. And the Daily Mirror has called them cowards, actually, because only one of the CEOs of the Big Six actually turned up. The others sent representatives. The guy on the far left is Tony Cocker, who's the E.ON, I think E.ON CEO. And they basically appeared before the House Committee on Energy and Climate Change to answer questions about inflated energy bills. As we know, 4 of the Big Six will be announcing changes. But I think it's a very complex market, the energy market. And the idea is that these energy companies pass on the costs to consumers. The question is, are they passing on the costs in a fair manner? And to what extent are portions of that cost, and the biggest by far is wholesale energy prices, which they're buying from suppliers. But also, it's worth bearing in mind that these companies also buy from their companies who supply energy. But one thing this debate has not really focused on is the fact that the UK is still heavily reliant on imported gas. And as long as that continues, we will face longer-term, higher energy costs. And in my mind, the question is how we can think more critically about investing in energy infrastructure, how we can reduce reliance on imported gas from Europe, Norway, Qatar, and other parts of the globe. So I think this is going to be a long-running issue. And the other thing is there is a proposal by the government to introduce an annual review of competition in the industry. Many would say now there is competition because there are 6 companies, but it is still highly concentrated.
Briefly, because we do want to get on to the other stories, but very quickly, I mean, obviously we've got an election coming up very soon in this country. This will be an issue. I mean, the Labour Party made that clear at their conference.
They really have set the tone, the Labour Party.
This is where we're going. But do you think it is enough pressure to see change, the sort of change you're talking about, or will it be sort of blown over and we as households will be grappling with these higher bills for years to come?
I think there needs to be enough pressure on this, and I see this being protracted over up till the elections, actually, in 2015. That's
all right. Thank you for that. Let's move on to the FT now. And the day of reckoning as banks bill for misconduct mounts. Are we still clearing up from the mess of 2008?
Yeah, and actually, this mess probably goes back further than 2008, and we're only starting to see some of the unraveling of this. By far, the latest bank that's been involved is the Dutch lender Rabobank, which is originally set up as a sort of farmers' cooperative, which has recently had to pay $1 billion in settlement over its role in the LIBOR scandal.
This article talks about the size of the legal fees as well. I mean, we hear about the fines. We don't know what their legal bills are.
The legal fees are running into, what, $750 million for RBS. Someone else who's I think it's UBS, has to make more provision for its legal costs. So I think we're going to see a lot more heads roll, actually, of this.
Now, date night, Norway. They're trying to sort of make this one an official to try and cut the divorce rate. Is that Is this the nanny state? What's going on?
Well, it is interesting because this is from Norway's Populist Party, and it seems to be mirroring something that was tried in parts of the US as well with some of the centre-right parties as well, the Republican Party. And it's actually being taken from a film, Date Night, a 2010 film in America.
Film. I haven't.
I've never actually seen it.
I have. It's quite
but
crazy.
the divorce rate in Norway is 40%, which is really almost half.
But should this be the business of government? Should government be intervening in this, which is a social phenomenon, shall we?
Except they're attempting to tie it back to some sort of, sort of link it to society's problems. And the question is there some undercurrent in Norwegian politics that's helping to fill this particular intervention?
And I suppose divorce does have an economic impact, doesn't it, on society?
It does. We can always find an economic link somehow, can't we? Right, let's... China Daily, business section. Courier's preparing battle plan for November the 11th. What is November the 11th?
Well, it's certainly not some sort of V-Day celebration. This is a really exciting story for me because it sort of points to the demographic story in China and the fact that e-commerce and technology is being such a big part of global spending everywhere. And November 11th is this day that was introduced by a group called Alibaba Group, where they sort of halve prices by 50% on many of their products.
Alibaba is like
only
an
in
Amazon.
China?
Yeah, it's
Alibaba's
like
an Amazon in China.
In China.
Yeah.
And they've now had to charter up to 100 cargo planes and logistics, and everybody's going to cashing on this. So it's going to be a rush. Question is, how will technology cope on that day?
The question is, how can we buy from here?
Yeah, exactly.
How do we get involved? Right, now, come on. Let's talk about this story.
I love this story because I don't know, I like this because I think it's a perfect example of an anachronistic a tendency in this country which very few people around the rest of the world would understand. Basically, explain what these lovely, glamorous young women are all about.
They're certainly not on the catwalk. These are debutantes. So look at it as sort of a lady's rite of passage into society. And this was introduced by George III in the 18th century. It's also was introduced in the US. And they were presented to the king or queen, and actually it was used as a forum for ladies to find husbands. Well, these days, because there is a greater degree of political correctness, it's much more seen as a social and professional career networking.
So these girls are not looking for well-heeled,
well, they
rich
probably
husbands.
are. I would argue they probably are, but perhaps not so blatantly obvious.
The official line is they're looking to further their careers and develop in social confidence, apparently.
Absolutely. And
which one might need to do. One might need to do.
Exactly.
And apparently they're very big on their list of to-dos is to do excellent charity work.
We all sound so cynical.
Which you should do, presumably.
Rolake, thank you very much indeed for coming in to see us. Yeah, on that cynical note, we better stop.
I think we're going to stop talking right now.
As it is, and have a good trip. We know you're going to the airport straight after this.
Right.
And thank you very much for being with us here at BBC World News this morning.
Stay with us on BBC One. You'll join the breakfast team in about 5 minutes. If you're on BBC World, you're stuck with the two of us. We'll see you soon.